We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
So I'm 62 years old, retired from the NYPD, thought I was leaving that all behind, and lo and behold, Uvalde happens. And I'm talking to my friend who is a sheriff here locally where I live, and I'm like, what do I got to do to get back into school to be a school resource officer? So he explained to me I have to go back through the academy again. And again, I'm 62 years old. Do I really want to go through an academy again? Because I know what it's going to entail, and I know it's going to be very physically demanding. And I've always been a gym rat, stayed in the gym. It's not like I had to get back in shape. In fact, the entrance test, I scored 276 out of a possible 300. So I felt pretty good about that. But getting back to the academy, now I'm doing like CrossFit, which is something I don't do. I run, I lift weights, the typical, things that you would do. Some, obviously some cardio, but I don't do CrossFit, swinging weights and doing wind sprints and lunges and all kinds of other. So it's completely foreign to me. But, in the end, my goal is, like I said, from the beginning, is to be a school resource officer, because at this stage of my life, what am I going to do? Am I going to sit around and watch my grass grow? My daughter's moved out. My son, he's pursuing a career in law enforcement. He's moving out. And my wife's like, you need a job. You cannot just sit around here. And, I've had a pretty decent life in terms of excitement, with NYPD. I got to live out my fantasies. I pretty much did just about everything with the exception of like hostage negotiation in the NYPD. I did 13 years in plainclothes operations. I know I really wasn't fooling anybody. I didn't do any undercover work, but, I did anti-crime. I did a robbery unit. I did narcotics. Then post 9/11, I did intelligence work and really kind of learned some amazing skill sets from different people with different backgrounds and different walks of life. So, I had it pretty good, had a pretty good career. And like I said, I thought it was all done, but apparently it's not all done. I still have a few more years, hopefully, God bless, left in me.
It's like that thing. I always joke with people and say a lot of us are just born with this affliction, and it's this inner drive that we want to be cops or crime fighters, really, is what I say, because everybody can kind of be a parking lot, lizard where they just sit around and watch, the grass grow in uniform, or there's a certain population that we just want to go, we want to get in the mix, and get on those specialized units. So it's interesting to hear you when you're talking about being 62, going back through the training in the academy and then physically excelling compared to maybe some counterparts, even across the country. As people are getting into police work now, a lot of them are battling, sadly, like the physical fitness aspect, but also just that ability and drive from inside. Like you can't help it. Like a lot of us, and we're going to get into your career, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I want the listeners and the viewers to understand, like the picture that was up on YouTube. If you're watching, obviously you saw it, but for the listeners, is the cover of Brooklyn to Baghdad, which is the guest Chris Strom, who actually wrote this book. He's here, and we're going to get in depth with all of that, but also to understand most of the people that you're going to encounter out there who are in police work and really doing it for the right reasons. It's very hard to just step away at some point. And then to also understand, like Chris was saying, still in shape, a tragedy happens, and then to understand I can still help in society. Like if I'm the one there when, heaven forbid, a gunman comes on campus, it's going to be handled, So what I really want to get into first is, I know some of your background, you kind of mentioned it. And for those who've read the book, y'all message me, we'll talk about it. But you'd started out early on in the Marine Corps. And if you don't mind, kind of walk me through how that ended up happening. Like everybody's got their own backstory for why they joined the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I mean, thanks very much for the intro and everything, BC. I appreciate it. I joined the Marine Corps for two reasons. The one reason I had really like a troubled home. I just, I'm not saying that for sympathy. I'm not looking for a shoulder to cry on, but my parents were divorced. There was very little supervision, and I was definitely. It was only a matter of time before I got into some real trouble, and I mean like legal trouble with the law. Uh, and there was this one particular shopping mall that I used to go to, and they had a freestanding Marine Corps recruiting station. Who knew? Right by the bus stop, as you get off the bus,
Yeah.
had a captive audience, and I always liked the way they looked. There was always an allure about it, and I said, "This is what I want to do. This is something I want to, challenge myself mentally and physically." And so that's really how that came about. I think if I had a different set of circumstances or a different home life, I don't know that I would have chosen that, but certainly those were the two biggest influences: the broken home and just feeling like helpless in the situation. So I tell people about the Marine Corps, especially people that are and military people in general. It's all the same. The brotherhood and the sisterhood, the fraternity of the Marine Corps, the Army, or whatever is universal. Like you could be anywhere in the world or in the United States, and you have a conversation, and it comes up. Oh, you served? Oh, I served too. And then it just begins from that. And it's like it's not only the biggest icebreaker, but the conversation is really more like with a friend instead of just a complete stranger. It just flows naturally. So the Marine Corps actually saved my life. I'll say that it's always given me the foundation to keep repeating to myself and even my children, don't quit. It's just around the corner. Don't quit. And my son is all on board with that. My daughter's been on board with that. You're going to get knocked down. Everybody gets knocked down. There's disappointments in life. You don't get through life unscathed, unharmed. And but I always kept that in the back of my mind, and I credit that to the Marine Corps. That foundation. Don't quit. Just keep moving.
Yeah, that I had a very, very similar background, and people have heard me tell it. I grew up skating punk rock, and it's a running joke people say on this podcast that when they listen, that there's like a drinking game that that people take a shot or a drink every time I say punk or skateboarding. But I say that to say, ran from the police, had a different perspective, but I always wanted at a young age go into the military, into the Army, and started reading books back then that the only way I knew anything about the military was through books about Vietnam units, and then anybody who had already been in and would talk to me. So a lot of older guys, my dad, my uncle, my grandfather, they would tell me their aspects of their side of it. But for me, it was like I wanted infantry. I knew I wanted at least 4 years, and it set me up. So I tell a lot of young people now, or anybody who is looking that way, like that changes their trajectory for me, just like you said, for you. And when we get into like all the things that you've done, and that probably all builds off of, just like you said, the Marine Corps. Like my thing was to build off the Army. It got me money in my pocket, paid for my college degree. And then when I went into police work, I didn't have that fear or that ability or that lack of confidence that I wasn't able to do the job. I was more worried about just filling out paperwork properly, but I was good to go with like weapons training, hands-on. I didn't mind that. So same thing with you, I'm sure. It's like coming out of Marine Corps. Then did you go directly into the NYPD, or what's your story there?
Well, I kind of took the long route. So I actually worked for the Plano Police Department in Plano, Texas. That was my first stop in terms of law enforcement. So that was pretty soon after I got out of the Marine Corps. And back then, the Plano Police Department, this is back in 1985, so I'm dating myself. It was about 160 guys and girls. And most of Plano, or at least half of the town, was kind of undeveloped. They were still, like west of this road called Preston Road, there was nothing but like farms and pastures and maybe a golf course, but there wasn't really anything. And that was, of course, my first sector on the midnight, so I'm like, I don't know if I could do this for 20 years. And because of the size of the department, I say this a lot to people that are looking to make moves and build their career in the police department. If you're going to pick a police department, pick one that has a decent size of police officers. And I say that because to get into a specialty unit like narcotics or an investigative track, somebody has to either get promoted or retired, or they have to move on into a different lateral move. So the movement in a small department versus a bigger police department is much easier. So I stayed with them. I lasted 2 years, and to make a long story short, I called my recruiter up in, my background investigator up in New York, and I said, "What am I still active on this list? Like, if I wanted to, come back to New York, what would I have to do?" And he goes, "I could have you in the next class, meaning January."
Oh,
and this is like October of
Mhm.
84, of 86 rather. So I'm like, okay. So I come up, they scheduled the medical, they scheduled the psychological, the EKG, all these other things that I had to do. And the next thing you know, I'm raising my hand and I'm back in New York in January of 87 in another police academy, second police academy.
Yeah. And so for some people, you feel free to Google what NYPD was like and the crime rate and what was going on in 86 to 87 and then all the way up into the early 90s. But for you, when you went through that academy, and that's one of the largest, obviously, if not the largest police department in the country, right?
Yes, sir, it is. Yep.
Yeah. And for me down here in the South, like when I'm reading about departments and innovation, I always go to books about NYPD, and even going back historically there's a book about the Black Hand back at the turn of the century when I think it was Joseph Petrosino and the Italian squad went completely undercover, plain clothes. He's getting locked up in jail to get intel. I mean, like, it's a great book. And when I read it, I was just blown away with how a department like that in a city that size stays oftentimes ahead of things in criminal organizations and how to do that. And I could be wrong. Worldwide, it's like NYPD's intel division or section is by far the best, the greatest. And I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but that was what you eventually got into with New York, right? With NYPD.
Yeah, correct. After 9/11 happened, they were looking for people to go into intel, and the backstory to that for me was I didn't want to go. I was working in narcotics and I had a great team of guys and girls, and I had steady days off Sunday, Monday. I made my own hours. The commander was very happy with me. I was very happy with him. And then 9/11 happened, and they were looking for people. And to make a long story very short, my son had gotten very sick, and I was home for 8 weeks, courtesy of the NYPD full pay, while he was convalescing. So when 9/11 had happened, and they were looking for people from Intel, the same captain, he had since transferred, called me on my cell phone and said, "Chris, I need a favor." He says, "I need you to take the spot in Intel." And I said, "For you, boss, anything." Because this is the same gentleman that got me home with my son while he was sick for 8 weeks full pay. So that's kind of like how I got into Intel. But getting back to your statement about in terms of intelligence and information, I have this conversation with people, whether it's in private or it's in a teaching environment. I tell people that the NYPD Intelligence Division is by far and away the biggest Google repository of all things human intelligence and counterterrorism, period. And I'm happy to debate that with anybody. If anybody wants to challenge me on that, I'm happy to have that conversation, because the things that the NYPD does in the intelligence division is pretty cutting edge. And some of it is really like moment by moment in terms of what is the legality in terms of the Patriot Act. So just as an example, some of the things that I would get myself involved with and using the Patriot Act as a baseline, I had a lawyer on call that worked specifically for the intelligence division. So if I was in one of those areas that I was uncertain on, I would explain to him the situation, and I would say, "Don't tell me what I need to do. Let me tell you what I would like to do, and just tell me if I'm on a good foundation for that." And more times than not, he would say, "You're good to go," and that's how it would roll. Another interesting fact about the intelligence division, and I'll just share this with your audience, and I know you know this, but in every major city around the world, it doesn't matter if it's in Europe or if it's in Asia, Australia, the Dominican Republic, Paris, London, anywhere in Spain, there is an NYPD intelligence officer stationed there with the host nation's intelligence group. So there's generally a sergeant and generally at least one detective, depending on the threat. So like London's obviously a big target for terrorism. Paris certainly is, and some other countries. But those people live there full time, and they are married up to the host nation's intelligence people. And basically, the reason for that is there was some obviously missteps with 9/11 and also with the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center. And so the NYPD said no more. So they've cut out the middleman, so to speak, what everybody knows is, and basically the intelligence is now in real time on the ground from somebody reporting, as opposed to a cable or a memorandum coming 3 days after the fact.
And that's kind of one of those things that in my background, I was in a department that basically gave me a lot of freedom. So at one point I was kind of what would be your counterpart, like a sergeant on an intel unit. But overall, I ran a gang intel monthly meeting. And that was my thing, was like, we have to get information directly from our counterparts in all these different departments and agencies. And it's like, you can't just pick up a phone and call someone's front desk when, the flag's gone up. It's like, let's build a rapport now. Everybody get in a room every month and talk, and we'll present information and that sort of thing. But we have to have that rapport to where at 2 a.m, I can call another agency and say, which I've done before, like, hey, we've got this person linked into an ongoing shooting spree between 2 different blood sets or 2 different gangs. Can you do me a favor? He's got an existing warrant. He's probably putting his head down at this location. Can you go and make an arrest or get a team to go make an arrest to prevent our shootings from occurring? It's this idea of like establish that network ahead of time, like build the ark before the flood. You don't want to be chest deep in water with a hammer and nail kind of thing. So it's one of those ideas that, again, I don't know anyone else that was doing that the way New York was, with sending sworn law enforcement officers out to other countries. Stuff like that, the whole idea of building things and being innovative to where you're getting that intel, uninterrupted and not sanitized, straight to the source, to where then a department or an agency can say, okay, now armed with this, what are we going to do for our jurisdiction, or how is this going to affect us? So I've always been impressed with NYPD side, and especially reading stuff about intel. And then I don't want to steal your thunder, but like your background in street crimes, in drug units, like your background, I would assume, helped tremendously on the intel side, even though you didn't know that. Like, you know what I mean? Like in your brain, because I'm the same way. It's like, I like doing this, but how does that going to apply to intel? So walk me through what it was like once you kind of got into that intel realm.
Well, it was, I wouldn't say it was culture shock, but it was one of those things where I was very comfortable operating out in the street. So, 13 years combined time of plain clothes. So if you do the math, I only did 7 in uniform. Yeah. And so I was comfortable in the street, and I worked with some really good people, and there's a whole trust issue and things like that. And fast forward now going into the intel, it's like, business casual. Well, I mean, I showed up in, whatever I wanted to wear pretty much, you know what I mean? Yeah. T-shirts and whatever, and blue jeans and sneakers and stuff like that. And, but now I get in there and I'm the sergeant. So I'm supposed to lead, you know what I mean? There's like all this anxiety and pressure I'm putting upon myself. But the reality was the people are people, and they welcomed me in there, and they showed me how they operate. I was never a micromanager. I was always one of these people that was persuasive, not authoritarian. And we got along great. And I ended up working with some of the most gifted investigators. When I say investigators, most people today it's a lost art in terms of communication, and when you have to interview and interrogate people. And it really is a perishable skill set that has to be worked on, and there's got to be a lot of failure before there's any success. And so that whole Rubicon was kind of like was fixed for me when I got there, because these were all seasoned people. So I was actually learning from them. They were learning from me, and we did some really great cases as a result of that. But, getting in there and having to transition from being a street person, working with, you're dealing with people that are either buying drugs or selling drugs, banging doors, doing search warrants and things like that. That I loved, that adrenaline rush, that satisfaction of, we're not going to solve the problem, but we're doing our part in terms of what we're supposed to be doing. And then going into Intel, I'm like, I don't know if I can replicate that kind of success, because and that was my fear and my anxiety. So that was the problem when I went in there initially.
Yeah. And a lot of, like, when you mentioned that about being a leader, I tell people a lot of times, like, stay out of your team's way. Like, you're monitoring and you know what they're doing, but most detectives became detectives because they were squared away, and then especially with the higher level units you get to, like, just let them do what they do. And then if you've got that background, then that's great. You can kind of guide, but then to understand, some people, especially on the Intel side, are really good on computers or signals, or reading and understanding things. But then you put them in front of a human source, or you ask them, hey, okay, you've got these whatever cameras from this location, but what does that mean? Does that mean the guys that are hanging out in this corner are actually committing crimes or plotting? You don't know, because you don't have the sources down there. So I'm assuming your unit eventually got into, or was already working, human sources, or CIs. Some people call them confidential informants, confidential human sources. That was always my thing. Like, I really loved that aspect. I can do the computer side stuff I need to, but that aspect of what you were doing at the time, which was completely terrorist directed, correct? Like, for the most part.
It was actually a combination of both. It started as criminal, and then it transitioned after 9/11 back into counterterrorism. So we call it HSO, or human source operations, like you were saying. You have to have a source. There's no way that you can operate without sources. So, again, my operating budget was $50,000 a quarter, so it's $200,000 a year. And so you'd say to yourself, well, I had 8 detectives. That's a lot of money for 8 detectives. But when you start, working these sources, and you start working these cases, and each detective, or generally they're paired up with another one, so there might be 4 teams that are going out, and you're running out on these cases along with them. That money actually goes faster than you would think. And one of the things, and I know you know this, but I'm going to share this with your audience and for people that are listening. The NYPD does not pay for nothing. In other words, if you have a source, he's got to bring you something bona fide. It's got to either be human intelligence, it's got to be a picture, it's got to be a tangible object, it's got to be tomorrow at this date and time. It's got to be something that actually happens. Now, have there been times rather that I've done a search warrant and it turned out to be a dry hole? Yes, because they might have moved the product and things like that. But I don't just turn around and give somebody money and hope that things are going to work out. Things have to work out, and then you get paid. So everybody kind of like has skin in the game. There's other organizations, and I'm not going to mention their name, but I'm sure you're well aware of, that is a completely foreign concept to them. We are just going to spend our money and buy our way out of this problem, and that doesn't solve anything. It doesn't solve anything here stateside in investigations, and it certainly doesn't solve anything internationally over in Iraq and some of these other places. But it's almost like, where others have failed, I'm speaking facetiously, I will succeed. So I'm going to continue that practice of giving money. Whereas in the NYPD, we're not giving you money because, first of all, I have to justify the money that's being spent. So, I'm issuing the money, but I have to answer to my lieutenant, who has to answer to the captain, who has to answer to the inspector, who's the zone commander. So there's got to be accountability. Well, you spend $5,000. What did you get? Did you get a search warrant? Is there any bad guys in handcuffs? Is the case still ongoing? Like, are we just going to keep spending money because we have it? So there's a lot of oversight and things like that, in terms of how the NYPD operates. And I made that a long story, but I want to hammer home that point. to your listeners. If you
Mhm.
have a CI, you need to vet him. You
Mhm.
need to test him continually, and you don't pay him for bad information. Now, if he's a CI and you've had him for an extended period of time, 6 months, and 90, he's got a 90% hit ratio, good information, good intelligence, then that's fine. But like on the first rodeo, you're not giving him any money.
Right.
And if he comes back empty-handed a second time, then you might be like, I don't think this is going to work out for you and I.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point that a lot of people early on, they're so antsy to get an informant, or a source. And so sometimes they'll leak and they don't realize it, but they may ask a question, and a really savvy gang member or career criminal, whatever, can read it. And if they say something like, oh well, who's whatever planning to rob something, they're like, in their mind, oh, you're looking for a robbery crew, and then they can make up something, and then they test the cop, and then the cop is like getting excited in their body language. And so a lot of times, like I'll explain or in classes talk to people about, you've got to also understand sometimes in the criminal world, and especially the gang world, a really good informant is also a really good survivor. Like, they read body language instinctively. They know, like, okay, I know what you're looking for, kind of thing. So, and I do teach like ways to test, and that, like, your background's like, all right, I'm gonna ask them a few questions, and then to find out if they're gonna lie to me on known facts that I know they should know. And if they tell me, you start to put in those fail safes. But it is true, like you're talking about, if you can develop a really good source and you're paying them for their time and effort, and they become really good at it, or they're just naturally good at it, it accelerates everything, the investigation, the direct action that your proactive assets can get on board and do, whether it's in the terrorism side or even in the criminal side, or when they both merge, sadly, which is what sometimes happens in cities, when people go to prison, get indoctrinated with a certain type of ideology, and then come back and they got that gangster mindset, but now they're radicalized and moving forward. Sadly, without getting off on a tangent, I do think we're going to see a lot more of that as these guys get into their 30s and 40s and their mindsets start to change, but they still got that gangster heart, or that gangster mentality.
Right.
But when we're talking about informants and sources like that, and you're talking about the rapport building and testing, and then you get that information, how does that like marry up or merge with the signals or the social media aspect, or the side of surveillance cameras? Like, how do you merge all of that to be successful?
Well, I'm not a technical guy, so that's my downfall. It's probably because of my age. The younger people, they grew up with this, so some of the younger detectives, they could whip around on a computer and things like that. In terms of surveillance, I mean, most of the time, I'm just speaking for the NYPD. It's not that we don't use technical surveillance and signals intelligence. Obviously, there is wiretapping and things that go on. That it's not actually called wiretapping, but it's
Right.
electronic surveillance and things like that.
Mhm.
But we live and breathe really on human source information. That's really what gets it. Because at the end of the day, when I want to go bang a door for a search warrant, I have to be able to present this to a judge. And sometimes the judge will, when you're doing this, obviously it's in camera, it's not in an open courtroom. They want you to produce the source, So now you're standing there, and the judges, believe it or not, are actually pretty smart people, and they know the questions
yeah.
to ask.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be caught with a source that he told you one thing before you got to the courthouse, and now he's changed his story. And so there's a lot of things that are riding on this. So that's why I say, getting back to this relationship, and you had touched on it too about the rapport. You got to make sure you have that with this person, and you're vetting this. The way the intelligence division works is mainly with surveillance teams, meaning either NYPD people, they have an actual surveillance team. If it's a smaller case, you might be doing your own surveillance, depending on the location. Again, this. It's a building. Well, the building is, I can get a floor plan from the city manager's office
Right.
and the clerk's office, rather. But that doesn't tell me about what's going inside in the building. If anything's been changed, what are the people and the makeup of the people and things like that. So that's why I say, go, and I've kind of made this a long story. You need a human source to get that kind of information, because there's no other way that you can get in there. And if you're trying to build the case, then that could take, that, as you know, that could take weeks, months, if not longer, to get this guy who's your source to even be trusted enough by the operation that you're trying to infiltrate. So it's a painstaking process. Sometimes they go very quick, as you know, very simple, and it becomes a building block for bigger and better cases. And sometimes it's a long-term investigation, and this confidential informant that's working for you, it takes time to get him to get buy-in from this organization.
So when you did your time in the NYPD, you cut your teeth on the intel side, and then you approach retirement, and you think, I'm going to retire and I'm going to be done, or no?
Oh, well, I was kidding myself. I thought I was just going to retire. I mean, and again, you become an adrenaline junkie. That's really what it becomes. And, and you become like a family if you work with these people. And I'm sure you've had this experience. You're spending more time with these folks than you are your own family. Let's be real about it. And so make sure if you have a wife, make sure she's independent, because if she's somebody that's not, or her husband for that matter, I shouldn't just say a wife. I'm speaking for myself. I have a great wife, but if they're not independent, you're going to be spending a lot of hours of work. So my typical day was a minimum of 12 hours a day. It wasn't mandatory, but it was expected, because we didn't really have 3 shifts. We had 2 shifts in the intel realm. So I was doing that for 5 years, and I had at the time they called it a Nextel Direct Connect. People would be like, "What? What is that?"
Yeah,
so it's basically a fancy phone that's a walkie-talkie that the director of intel or one of his managers is calling me and saying, "Hey, there's an explosion in Brooklyn, and we want you to respond there." Now I don't live in Brooklyn. I lived in Long Island at the time, so depending on the time of day, the day of the week, my and I had a company car, my ability to get there, is all subject to all those other factors that are involved. So I'm saying all that to say this: I love that. I loved being the point guy. The phone would ring. What's going on? I need a status report. I need an update. But after 5 years of doing that, when I left, I had over 1,500 hours in comp time. That doesn't count the overtime. So the overtime was probably at least that and then some. So I knew I was like, my kids were young and I needed to make a move, and I had an opportunity to move to Virginia, and I took that. But I was really only kidding myself, because I still had that. I would watch news and I would see other events that were happening around, the country. And I was like, so yeah. I really never really left it behind. And even now, again, as I say, I'm 62 years old. I feel like I'm going backwards in life, and I'm going to be a school resource officer, watching kids get on and off the bus and saying hi to the moms and dads that are dropping them off in the car line.
Yeah. So when if I remember right in the book, it's been about maybe 2 years ago, I think, when I picked it up. But if I remember right, you have a section in there about being retired, but getting a phone call, like a cold call out of the blue from a company or organization that in other words, like, you were not seeking them out, they were seeking you out. Am I right on that? Is that my memory right?
Well, a part of it's true. I mean, I spread a wide net. I had put out my resume to different people, because I came down here with the idea that I was going to do construction in Virginia, and I was working with somebody, and it just didn't work out. We could not work. We could not get along. But basically, our his work ethic was so antithetical to mine, and I just could not work with this person. So I ended up putting my application out, and I'm literally in my basement with a paintbrush doing the cuts on the ceiling, and the phone rings, and I'm like, I got paint in my hand. Do I want to grab my phone? And I end up grabbing my phone, and there's a recruiter on the phone, and he starts talking to me about the job. And I said, well, you're going to have to forgive me, because I filled out a few applications. Tell me about the company and the job and things like that. So that conversation lasted for about 15 minutes. Later on, there was in the same day, there was another call. It was a more definite and detailed conversation about the job. And basically, I would be going to Iraq for a year, and they gave the salary ranges, and they said, is this something you'd be interested in? And I said, yeah, I'm definitely interested.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like how that happened. I don't want to mislead people and say, oh, I was so indispensable that people were finding me, Google searching me. It wasn't anything like that. But in relative terms, that's partially true.
Yeah, well, but that's what I love about the backstory is the mindset that some people have is like, here's the problem we have. Let's set egos aside. How are we going to solve this problem? If it is IEDs going off, if it is an actual structure that we know is operating. When I say structure, like terrorist organization, made up of human beings, how are we going to disrupt and stop this? And then it's that idea of where's the talent? Can we pay them what they're worth and get them their boots on the ground over there, and then get them in play doing what they do best? And can the military side adjust to that and understand, here's this, quote unquote civilian with a military background, but who is really good at what he does? Is that going to transition and help make a successful team?
Yeah.
So if you can kind of walk us through some of that.
Well, I got to tell you, it was pretty ugly before it got pretty.
Yeah.
I'd be honest with you, because, again, everybody's got ego, myself included, and everybody has pride. So that's a dynamic that you're constantly having to check yourself, check, as they say, try and be humble, and put that aside. The Army or the military in general, I'm just, soldiers. So I'll just say soldiers, because that's very generic, but that's very true. They have a way that they've been trained to do certain things, and now you're trying to bring in a different perspective. But the problem for us was a lot of it was self-inflicted, meaning the team that I was part of, everybody on the team, with the exception of me and two other people, and to include the translator, were special forces operators. So these were like seasoned people that are part of this team, but the people that we're supporting are basically conventional Army. They're not a special forces unit. So you're trying to get buy-in from the base commander, who's a full-bird colonel. This is probably his first time in Iraq, and he doesn't even have the combat infantry badge, but he needs to be there in order to get on track to get promoted. So, and I know all this, and people that are familiar with the military in general and things like that understand it, especially if they've been in theater or have been in Iraq or Afghanistan. And so the team is trying to get buy-in. We're trying to get acceptance from the Army. And, if you thought it was bad with me with my own team, because I'm not a special forces guy, now you're trying to ram a team down of retired guys who in their mind are like, well, why are you retired? Why aren't you still actively doing this as a cop in New York? Or why aren't you still operating as a Green Beret or as a SEAL? Like, why are you coming in? So those challenges were very hard to get over. And we had, like I said, some self-inflicted wounds from the first person that was running the team, whose communication skills was really abysmal.
What was some of that? I would assume like the ego checking, like you were saying, when someone, and I do it too, I have to always do it. I try to use the term ego free, but yeah, you just have to check it and go, okay, is my head getting too big? Let me try to shrink it a little bit. But was one of that some of the major battles you were having to get over, or was it, hey, can everybody understand we all have separate roles? And what I'm bringing right now is the intel side, like the rapport building, can we gather this information from human beings and get ahead of this cycle of violence?
Yeah, and therein lies the problem. And again, the team, even like I said, within my own team, there were people that questioned my ability. And again, I know we had this conversation before we started this podcast. You're walking in the room to do a training on gangs, and there's this other fellow that's there with you, and he's this big muscular guy, and you totally dislocate the people's expectations because they thinking you're going to talk about, if I remember right, nutrition, and this guy's going to be talking about gangs, and it's the opposite. And so, but this is the challenge I'm having with my own team and with the Army. And so when we finally got buy-in from this one team, 122 TST, which stands for Tactical Strike Team, the relationship wasn't immediate, but we kept going out there, and there was more there wasn't success immediately. I didn't solve all the problems in Iraq, even the team itself collectively. But then it started to change, and we started to become more successful. And the team that I was part of started to gel. So we had that obstacle to get over, to work where everybody knew their left and rights on the Phoenix team, and then how to incorporate that relationship with a conventional Army team. Now, again, the people that drove us around are full-time green suiters, Army, regular Army. They pulled them from like admin jobs. So they're not even, so like they're our drivers, and they're setting up the security cordon, and they're like, but they were assigned to us. The team that was supporting, they had already had, this is like their second tour over there. So this is like, they're working on their 2 years and counting. When we started to all work together as a team, and everybody knew what they were supposed to do, and we're going to shotgun the door off its hinges, and then K9's going to go in, and then we're going to separate the men and then from the women, and we're going to separate the children from the adult males. Once that all started to come together, that's where the rubber met the road. That, and plus what we did to create even a better and stronger relationship, instead of having the team 122 TST, the Army team that we're supporting, we were using them as a force multiplier. So I taught them how to do house searches, or TSC, tactical site exploitation, and I told them the things to look for. So and I'll just paraphrase this: I'm in a bathroom at 3 o'clock in the morning talking to a bomb maker, notionally.
Okay.
And the people are searching the house. Now, instead of just the team that I'm working with, the Phoenix team, searching the house, now it's the Phoenix team and the Sergeant Dave Peluso's team from 122 TST. So I essentially have like 8 people at any given time breaking down all the rooms in the house and searching. And then every now and then somebody is knocking on the door. Hey, Chris, so I'm opening up the door, and they're handing, my dog is having a moment.
That's a good,
I should have probably not done that. But they're handing me a piece of physical evidence that I could say, you told me you weren't a bomb maker, but here we have a bomb component that's associated with bombs. So it was a psychological challenge, and we're breaking this person down. But that did not happen immediately. But once it did happen, we took off.
That's one of those things too. Like if somebody's listening and they're a detective or they're a patrol officer and they've done some interviews or some contacts like that, there was always this rule coming up through the ranks that never interrupt somebody during an interview, or never interrupt somebody when they're in the box, or whatever you want to call it. And the same thing like a field contact where I pull somebody out in the cut or something and go, okay, we're gonna go talk, but you need to interrupt me if you got something that is time sensitive like that, or something that you can say, you're telling me you're not a bomb maker. Here's direct evidence in your home that you are. Now, let's get back to the point of where you're telling me that you're not a bomb maker. We need to talk about some other things. I would assume is kind of how the conversation goes. But that idea, like you were saying, of teaching the team members, and I'm quite sure they were probably all on board once someone took them under their wing and said, hey, look, like we're in the fight. This is how you're going to search systematically room to room. And then we're all going to be part of this. So like, I'm sure that the soldier that finds that piece of evidence and is knocking on doors, like spiking the football kind of thing. Like, hey, we're on to something here. We have this direct evidence. This is the person who is building bombs, who's killing, citizens and Americans, So when you did that and you started kind of replicating that, is that when the success was really starting to just get full bore? Like, hey, okay, this Phoenix team we're on it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, we became like, I wouldn't say indispensable, but it was to the point that this one particular team, the 122 TST, they would not do an operation without us. If they were rolling, we were rolling, right? And a lot of our things were spun up because there had been an event. So we would do what they call post-blast assessment, or a PBA, and we would gather, so we'd roll on that as well. But getting back to what you said, that we went from like having 1 or 2 operations in a week to like 1 every day, sometimes 2 every day. The op tempo was exhausting because it's not just the time out on the field and the time on target. Now it's processing the evidence, writing all the reports. And what was the beauty of this whole program was we weren't there to take credit for this. In other words, this isn't the Phoenix team's success story. This is 122 TST Sergeant Dave Peluso's success story. So now I know you can relate to this. If you can imagine coming back and you've grabbed a high value target. So the team collectively rolled up 91 high value targets. So these are tier 1 and tier 2 people, which for people not in the military, these would be targets that would be generally speaking assigned to a special forces operator, whether it was a SEAL or it was a Green Beret outfit. So now we're picking off these targets. Back to Sergeant Dave's team, they're now in the dining facility. So this is spreading like wildfire. Like oh my God, did you hear about Sergeant Dave's team? They rolled up so and so, right? So when I was 48 years of age when this was all going on, when you watch that and you see that kind of affirmation for them, from their peers, that you can't pay me enough money for that. That's just like awesome beyond awesome in terms of how gratifying and satisfying that really was to see how they felt about themselves in this fight. Because make no mistake about it, these people were killers. These people were targeting primarily soldiers. There was a sliding fee scale for the insurgency, Al Qaeda, and franchise, that the more people they killed, and they videotaped everything, the more money they got paid. So that was their incentive. The Army's incentive and our incentive was, we're going to crush you. And we crushed them.
I think that history will show too, just like the way World War II tapped into resources from law enforcement with like W.E. Fairbairn training commandos for the OSS or SOE. The same thing, like history is going to show. Once again, America goes, okay, what are our assets? Let's get them all together, get them in a room, develop something that will work, and also get the hell out of the way when they start going to work. Like, let them do that and empower them to do that. And just like in the police world, oftentimes cities, and I know the one that I was in for a long time, you have multiples like street crimes units or proactive units, and you start hearing the buzz of, well, the gang unit's going after these guys. And then you hear about this, like, what would kind of be the farm league team, like a district team of a couple of officers pulled and a hard charging sergeant. And they're like, hey, they just picked off that homicide suspect. They got a lead from, a traffic stop they did, and a person put him on the house where he's hiding out. And then you get to walk into a room and see these, first, second year officers getting excited. Like, hey, we got in a fight. Like, we caught this murder suspect. And it was based on a traffic stop where the sergeant or senior officer's like, look, yeah, you got weed, you got whatever. We need to know where the shooting suspect is. And it flips that info. The same way, I'm quite sure, going, house to house and starting to pick off one person leads to another person, leads to another person. And then just that idea of, hey, this team, this Sergeant Dave's team, like they're doing it. And then when they get that, it's that you build on that, like that addiction or that adrenaline that you're going, let's go get the next one. Like, once that side, your team obviously is disrupting the IED makers and figuring out what their motives are. And then now we're taking out the bomb makers. We're also taking out, probably, I would assume, middle management of that organization. And maybe not your team directly, but if everybody's making that concerted effort, that organization can't stand. It puts them basically into chaos or disruption. And that's what I always love hearing about. And also for people stateside and in law enforcement to understand the skills we build here are the same, can be replicated. It's organization versus organization. And whether you're going after La Cosa Nostra, you're going after, hammerskins or skinhead, Nazi skinhead organizations or gang member organizations, any existing organization that's out there committing acts of terrorism or crime, a lot of the same principles can be applied. It's flipping people into sources, mapping out the structure if you can and the hierarchy, and then being very strategic about what you do. And then for the leaders listening, stay out of the way of the really motivated ones and give them what they need. If they need money for informants, get them money. If It's, hey, we need better vehicles, or hey, our team is squared away. We don't need anything. Don't start bringing new people in, and don't become the good idea fairy and come walking in and telling us how to really be successful when we're crushing it. You know what I mean? It's like,
Listen, the good idea fairy has ruined many good investigations. I'll tell you right now. And then, then there's the Johnny come lately. It's like they weren't interested in the party, and now all of a sudden they want to be in the party. You know what I mean? So, and I know you know what I'm talking about. And but it is basically a tried and true a tactic. It's not that I invented flipping people, just like you didn't invent flipping people.
Exactly.
But it comes down to the guy in the arena and the communication skills. And can you do this? And the team working collectively with, like, no, this guy's had some formal resistance training. He's not going to budge. I go, until I do the psychological genie trick on him. And I go, here's the bomb. And it was in your bedroom in the nightstand. So, I mean, like, so we really need to move past this. We have to acknowledge this is real, and you're in a bathroom with me at 3:00 in the morning. So let me help you. How can I help you? So based on that, and this is true story. We were, again, getting back to the relationship, everybody's working in synchronicity. I've gone to as many as 4 different targets in one night. Unheard of. Map tracked, where do we need to go, and found joy at each one. So again, anyone that knows the military, and we both know the military coming from that background, the Army, especially in the combat zone, is very risk adverse. The military, if they don't have a targeting package, or if we can't get positive ID on this person, we're leaving with our tail between our legs and our pride and ego down, in as far down as it can go. So that's very crushing psychologically for the soldier. When you have success and you get to keep building upon that success and the excitement and everything like that, everybody is switched on and everybody wants to be part of that. You know what I mean? So now we're taking down some of these targets. I don't want to get too off track, but imagine you had a target and it's in your zone, right? And my targeting officer, which was a fellow Matt Pacino, who I speak about in the book, is in memory of an amazing targeting special forces guy on loan to us. Imagine if I have a conversation with you. You're notionally the intelligence officer or targeting officer rather for your organization, and I say, "Hey, I think I know where this guy is that you're looking for," and you brush me off because, after all, what do you know? I've been working this target for months now, and you can't possibly be right about that. So, okay, I had that conversation with you. You're not interested. I go out and now I find this guy. Okay? And now the Black Hawk helicopter is coming in for a landing at Fod Falcon in just south of Baghdad in Iraq. And where are they going? They're going to the detention facility to grab the target that you didn't want, but now you want him. And and the team, the Phoenix team and Sergeant Dave's team went out and got him, even though you said you didn't want him. Now all suddenly you want him. You want to call him now. So that was a lot of that going on, not by design, and certainly not to be like somebody that would like try and undermine somebody or make somebody look bad. But you have to understand this from a military concept. I'm a colonel or a lieutenant colonel, certainly, and I'm in charge of a platoon of special forces operators. And this is like, as you say, the farm team going out there and they're grabbing my target. And the lieutenant colonel is like, steam coming out of his ears. How in the world is this possible? How is this happening? And why is this happening? If you guys had identified this guy 6 months ago, why did you not take this target off the plate? But it wasn't by design, but that certainly happened quite often, more often than not.
Yeah, and what it reminds me of this. There's an officer I had. Well, I didn't have him, but he worked in a district, and he had been in some of my classes, and so he was just this go-getter. And he would always tell me about, I'm going to be bold out in the streets. Like, I'm going to make bold moves. I'm going to do things. I'm going to let everybody know this is my beat. Great patrol officer. He builds rapport with this local source who kind of gives him the ins and outs of where people are located. And in this area, I mean, he had like a 2-block radius. It was almost, but a lot of people had warrants. It was like the most violent intersection we had at the time. So I was on a gang unit. We get information about the shooting suspect. So everybody's, trying to find this person. and nobody really has any leads. This patrol officer calls me and he's like, "Hey, I have a lead on this shooting suspect in a house, but I don't, what am I supposed to do?" kind of thing. I said, "Dude, we'll come to you. We'll set up the perimeter. This is your show. We're not stealing, your arrest. We're not doing any of that. Once you make the physical arrest, we'll help you, get linked up with the aggravated assault unit, because they're going to want to interview their suspect. This is all you, brother. Like, we got you covered." And so it was nice being on a team where people were like, yeah, like everybody supported him. They knew he was a really good officer. So it was like going in, setting up the perimeter, making the arrest. Sadly, that guy kind of moved on and is now like flying helicopters. You know what I mean? Like, I always had this vision of him, coming up through the ranks and getting to do these really cool assignments and kind of passing that personality down. Like, man, do the same for other people that everybody's kind of doing for you. So it's that same idea. Like, had people blown him off and been like, well, we don't get credit, he wouldn't have been able to make the arrest on his own. That would have been completely unsafe. Or we go in, swoop in and steal the arrest. It's just,
Right.
It's completely wrong. I'm quite sure though, there are a few people that at that point were like, oh, like you got the package, you got the person, and how are they doing that? That's what should be up the chain should be. Can we replicate that, or can we get out of their way as well? Or if we've got a lead and they're really good at what they're doing, can we funnel a lead over to them and let them run with it? Especially if you're hitting 4 places or 4 locations in one cycle like that tempo is like, people are self-motivated at that point. You don't have to put the boot in them and go, hey, I need y'all to go. It's like, it's almost, trying to hang on to the team. Like, can I keep up with them? So out of all of that was going on, and you end up doing some incredible work like that and replicating it, I'm quite sure, at least with like the soldiers you had trained and that sort of thing. What would be one thing or like one takeaway or sustain that maybe you had after you left that area, that theater? What was one thing that kind of you could take away from that and say, this was, or how things should be replicated in your absence, in other words, if that makes sense?
Well, again, I don't want this story to be about me and
Mm-hmm.
self-aggrandizing, but when the book came out, I don't want to say her name because she's still active duty Army. She's
Mm-hmm.
an officer. She works in the S2, but she's also a trainer, and so she's at a higher level. And when the book came out, she texted me, and I screenshotted it. I saved it because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to get rid of this message. She goes, "Thank you for writing the book." She goes, "I hold this book up in class," because she worked with us and worked with moreover, really worked with Matt, my friend Matt Pacino, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of developing these targeting packages. So she said in the screenshot, "The book is great. I hold this book up in class and talk about the Phoenix team and the successes and how it was done." And she goes, "And now it has become part of their TTPs, their techniques, trainings, and procedures."
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, they didn't say Chris Strom developed this program,
Right.
but
right.
they basically captured how it was done, and this was the team that did it. And for her to hold the book up in a classroom, again, that's to me, I'll take that. I'll take that any day of the week.
Yeah, and that's a great way to kind of conclude it, is just that, like the team effort, the idea that book has captured how to do this, how to be successful. So hopefully people are reading it, understanding it. Obviously they are now, since it's in their programming. But I do want to kind of shift gears just a little bit. I know a lot of people out there will have questions that they'll send me through Instagram or through email, but for people out there who've listened to this, who are going to pick up the book and read it, what's the best way or easiest way they can kind of follow you? Because I know you do a lot of podcasts, you do a lot of guest spots on television. What's the easiest way they can follow you or contact you?
Yeah, I'm like an open book, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Instagram under Brooklyn to Baghdad. I'm on Facebook under Brooklyn to Baghdad, and my name, Christopher Strom. I'm not trying to hide anything
Mm-hmm.
from anybody. The book is available on Amazon. If somebody wants me to sign the book, I've had to, and this is the other thing too, which again, I don't want to get off topic, but in terms of the book and what the book has done in terms of affirmation and things like that. And again, people that I don't know will read the book and they'll direct message me, or they will email me, or they will send me the book and say, can you sign this? I want to give it to my dad, or can you sign it? And I want to. So what I tell people is, if you buy it on Amazon and you find me through social media and you message me, if you send me the book, I'll sign it. I send it back for free. I don't make money in terms of like, oh, can I buy the book directly from you and I'm going to charge you more than what Amazon? Again, and again, not to get off topic, but people think, well, if the book sells for like $20 or $25, whatever it is, believe me when I tell you, Chris Strom is not getting $20 on every book that is sold. Trust me when I tell you. But in terms of meeting people and being able to contact me, I'm readily available. I have no problem signing the book any way you like it. If you want to leave a review, that's great too. I'm happy for all the reviews. The book goes up and down. It reached number 2 on Iraq war genre about a month or so ago, which, you know, I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, again, first time writer. I'm just a cop from New York, you know, but I had a story to tell, and I guess people relate to it. So I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, it's an amazing read. I've posted it a few times. I'll push it back out there, you know, every few weeks, every few months. So I appreciate it. I always like to kind of wrap up a little bit. We talk about music, and you and I don't think I've ever talked about music, whether you still listen to it or not, or if there was any kind of influence. Like, we often talk about any music that either one we're listening to right now that's motivating, or anything that we would recommend to a friend or a person or whatever, like, hey, check this out. Is there anything in your world that has anything to do with music?
Well, you know, it's funny. One of the people I met is this guy named John, and I'm probably not going to pronounce his last name, Guerreri, and he's a former Secret Service agent, and he has his own podcast called Silver Spear.
Yes, yeah.
So, and he's a super cool guy. But the band he's in charge of the security for is called Shinedown. So and I'm not going to get too far down the road with this, but I like their music very, very much. And he's actually invited me to come to one of their concerts. We haven't been able to link up with that, but I'm kind of like a 90s rock guy. Like, I like Creed. But the funny thing is, it's funny that you're mentioning the music. So if you could imagine, I'm trying to type an interrogation report, and Matt Pacino is playing heavy metal, like, you know, Korn and, you know, Limp Bizkit, to the point where you can't even hear your own thoughts. You know what I mean? And I'm like, all right, I need to go in the office next door, because I can't, you know, it's 4:00 in the morning and I'm trying to type, and I'm not a good typer anyway. And so that's kind of like the span of music that I listen to. So
no, that's great. John's good people. I did an episode on his show, Spirit Talk, and I want him to come on ours. We've coordinated back and forth, and I think I was supposed to. He came through my city, same thing. He's like, "Hey, hit me up." And if I remember right, if I remember right, I got called out to have to go work a homicide either that night or we had worked into the next day. But eventually we'll link up. He is a great guy. All on board with his stuff. So I appreciate your time, Chris. And everybody check out his book, Brooklyn to Baghdad. Hit him up on Instagram. Send me any comments or questions you've got. You can post them here on YouTube. Give us a like, and then let me know what you think. Any other thoughts there, Chris? You good?
No, just thanks a million, brother, for having me on the show. It was long overdue. I'm glad we finally did it together, man.
Yes, sir. We'll do another episode. We'll come back on and we'll maybe swap some stories about the days when you were running and gunning in NYPD.
Yes, sir.
All right. Appreciate it. Disruptors out.